Dr. André Siamundele has experience teaching French language courses, college and honors seminars on African cinema, post-colonial studies, and Francophone literature and culture. He had published several articles on the question of identity in Africa and the diaspora. He has extensive experience in study abroad. He holds a PhD in French and Francophone studies from Yale University, teaches Francophone studies and international and global studies courses. He has served as the co-chair of the World Languages Academic Transformation Team at the University of Maine in Farmington. He is now a faculty member at Lincoln University, and his research focuses on Afro-Francophone post-colonial images with an interdisciplinary approach that includes areas such as culture, language, literature, history, and politics. Dr. Siamundele, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Lawrence. Thank you for the wonderful introduction. And I was just thinking, I don't think this is the best place to pay tribute to Mudimbe than at this global forum, because Mudimbe himself has this global perspective of things. And I'm glad to be here also because when I'm thinking about Mudimbe, I'm thinking about somebody also who passed away a couple weeks ago, months, that's Ngungi wa Thiong'o, thinking about his idea of decolonizing the mind. So it makes me think of what I'm going to talk about today. The question of Ecart. Ecart is a term, is an expression in French, which means, when, I mean, he's from one of his texts. The text is, the text was translated in English as the rift. It's a symbolic way of saying that it's very difficult sometimes to ask self who you are if you are in uncomfortable situation. And Mudimbe find himself most of the time in that situation. I'm not gonna go through his biography. I'm just gonna discuss this idea of Ecart, how difficult it is to define yourself when you are in a situation where you're so uncomfortable talking about yourself because you don't know who you are. And at the same time, you're trying to find out who you are. The best image I have of that is it's just like looking at yourself in a mirror, but you have a broken mirror, right? You try to find your image, but you can't see your image. And you're raising, it's a way of raising questions about uh, the identity, which I called, identity effect, or some people call it quest of identity, uh, all of that. So looking at Mudimbe's life, he basically, let me share this with you. I see that this. Can you see it? No, probably not. Share. Oh yeah, I see. Mm, 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 mm. Okay. You see that? I want to make it bigger.
Yes.
Okay. So the existential gap is that uncomfortable situation where somebody's trying to define who they are. And Mudimbe, in different ways, he raised the question. He raises the question uh, because he feels that we all know the problem. We can find the solution, how to solve it, but we're just not able to do it. It's just, you know that the mirror is broken. How do you know that you have to fix it, but you're not fixing it. You keep looking at yourself at that mirror, and you're getting a fake image of yourself. This is not the first time. Mudimbe is not the first one to raise the question, especially when it comes to the Francophone world. I mean, the same question was raised by Aimé Césaire, by Senghor. But what Mudimbe is bringing in this discussion is trying to situate himself between those who insist on the African identity, like Cheikh Anta Diop, and Senghor, who says that, let's mix the Western civilization and our own way of thinking. So the way Mudimbe does that, and the way I approached it is through his work and also his life. Mudimbe was born Valentin Yves, which is a V and a Y, and which his last name Mudimbe. And in 1971, the government in the Congo decided that Congolese should have a true Congolese name. So instead of many people just changed, like myself, my father just sent me a name and say, okay, we'll no longer call you André, we'll call you Nzunguta. The president himself, he was called Joseph Désiré. He becomes Mobutu Sese Seko Kukumbendu Wazabanga. And that is called the authenticity politics. So Mudimbe, instead of just changing his name, questioned that decision. He questioned that decision, saying, what a name has to do with me as a person, because I'm still the same person, right? Even whether they call me Mudimbe something else or Mudimbe whatever, I'm still the same person. So he decided, he just went through the African list of names, the Congolese list of names. He picked two names. The criteria was to use the first one starting with a V and the second one starting with a Y. So then he'll keep his Valentin Yves, those two are French, but he becomes Vumbi Yoka Mudimbe. So now he is no longer Valentin Yves. He becomes Vumbi Yoka Mudimbe for those who want to use an African Congolese name. But for those who find this difficult, they can just call him VY, Mudimbe. So that's a way, this is how he approached that. A very interesting way of, responding to a government decision about people's identity. Instead of just saying, okay, I don't want it, but he decided that to go with it, but on his own ways. That's what Mutimbe did. He questioned basically three characters, which I think they are really the main character we should look at when it comes to African history or African identity. The first one is the priest, the Catholic priest. The second one is the political figures, the politician. And the third one is the scholar, the intellectual. He found that those three categories, those three characters are in very, very uncomfortable situation when it comes to defining who they are, because they are the leader in some ways. People looking after them, but they cannot themselves define who they are so that others can follow them. So that's the concept of Ecart, not being able to define yourself, but trying to find who you are, but because you cannot. So instead of just thinking about Ecart in a vacuum, I decided to go and look into his writing, not his philosophical writing, not his essays, which I looked at some point, but I decided to study because I'm a literary person. I love literature, to examine his text, his fictional text. Why did I do that? Because I think that something you find in literature is that you find the aesthetic representation when questions are raised in fiction, but at the same time, we always have to remember that there's a message in any fictional work. It captures the world of political and historical reality. You have to put the text in its context to better understand it. So when I looked at Ndimbe's text, they are fictions. But when I looked at them, I find the question of Ecart being raised in every single situation characters are facing. And I'll go through some examples. So the first text is called Ecart, the Rift. It's a wonderful text. Here we have an intellectual, a scholar, an historian, an African historian trying to understand, trying to study an ethnic group in Africa. He found himself in a situation where he has to travel to Paris, probably to Washington, or to Brussels to find the materials he needs to do his research. And that's what is happening to African university. We can talk about globalization, you have to travel, but when it comes to learning about African culture, most of the writings we find in foreign countries. And that character went to Europe. Then he get to a point where he said, wait a minute, this doesn't make sense. Why didn't just do some empiric research in Africa instead of coming here, read through European, my culture? So that's the first thing. And how do you trust a scholar like that? That's the question Mudimbe is raising. How do you trust a scholar who cannot just go ahead on the ground and studies on people, but he has to go through I use the term master, to the former colonizer to understand his own people? And unfortunately, the end of the text is very tragic. He couldn't define himself. He couldn't say anything about his people. And again, people criticize Mudimbe for saying that, you raise the question, but you don't offer us an answer. But the goal for Mudimbe is not to offer an answer because there's no answer to that question. There's no answer. And he said that about his own life too. As I said, about his name, but also when he came to the United States, as you know, he started teaching in Zaire, in Lubumbashi. Then he went to Europe is to study and to teach, and then he came to the United States, and he was at Haverford. And he said, they did not know in which department to put me because he was all over the place. So they had to create a program just for him because he was an anthropologist, he was a philosopher, he was a linguist, he was writing novels. So they had to create a department for him. So meaning that the goal is not to find answers. The goal is to raise the question. And maybe each person can find its own answer. That's the critics, you can find on Udimbe because people expected to have an answer to, the lake of Ecart, for example. What will happen? What African scholar should do? And you have the answer given by Gugi Wachongo saying that, stop thinking and writing in Africa, in European languages. Go back and write in African languages. But then you realize that you can't publish it, get it published worldwide. So the problem is somewhere else. And then we have the second character, which is after the scholar, we have the African politician. We embrace democracy, and you find that in a text called Le Bel Monde, where the question of values is being raised. Should we just copy what is being done elsewhere? Especially, I mean, we can say today in 21st century, we've seen how unsuccessful democracy has been, even in those old democracies. So you find that in the Belly Monde. And then you have another text that's kind of goes together with the question of the political figure is called Entre les eaux, between tides. Okay, here we have a priest who has to decide between God and the revolution. People coming to him, and that's a key question. People coming to him and asking him, what should we do? Do you think God will accept us to do the revolution, to kill in order to have peace, in order to remove those dictators? So the priest is in the middle of all of that, what he preached, but also what is good for the people. But the one I really I think is the conclusion of all of this way of thinking from the scholar, the politician, and also the priest is what's happened in 1978. Again, I'm talking about fiction here. This is 1978. We're talking about the Second War that was launched by rebels to destabilize the government in the Congo. And the book is called Shaba Second. Shaba Second, that's the Second War of Shaba. Shaba being a province in the Congo. We read the story, we don't read the story of the war, we read the story of the feelings of one nun, a religious person, being in a congregation of nuns in Shaba. And when the war started, all the white nuns left the country. That's something we always will expect. When there's a war in Africa, the first people, I always tell my students when they say, oh, is it safe to go to Africa? I say, if anything happened in Africa, you'll be the first one to come back in your country. People will protect you. So the first thing they asked those nuns, those white nuns, to leave the country and to go back to where they came from, France, Belgium, And this Black Congolese nun was asked to be the leader of the congregation, which she didn't know how to lead the congregation because she has not done that. It was always a white nun doing that. She said, wait a minute. And she's writing in a diary. As a reader, I have access to the diary of the person who's writing, the character. It's kind of weird when you think about it, as a literary process. She's writing and saying, I do not understand. I've never been number one of this congregation. I've always been behind all these white nuns. But now that my country is destabilized, is in war, they have been asked to lead. Isn't that the time for them to stay? Because they came here to help. Isn't that the time for them to help instead of leaving? And it was a very good question. Should they really actually leave when things are very bad, or should they stay? Because I know some individuals have decided to stay. And when they stay, their government say, okay, you are on your own. We're not protecting you anymore. You know, if there's a war, I don't know, before we bomb any country, we make sure that all Americans are out, right? Okay. So by reading that, she had the same question of identity. Who am I? Do I belong to this congregation or do I belong to my people? I've been left here because I belong to my people, but I'm part of the congregation. Why did they take me with them? They asked me now to stay because I'm who I am. So with those three examples of, through those three characters, I just want to show how it's hard to think outside the box. Box being, the language you speak, the training you got, the philosophy you believe in. How is it's very hard to do that. And Mudimbe himself was in the same situation. He's a Greek scholar, a Latin scholar, Western scholar. How can he build a strong voice to talk about Africa without referring to his teacher, his master? Can we build something from scratch, from from the ground? And those are the questions he's raising, not because he wants us to answer it, because he wants us to think about it every step we take, on every step we take. Every time you pick a book and you start reading about Africa, ask yourself the question, is there a way I can go around and just get the authentic materials instead of relying on what they have seen, how they describe my people, or how they describe the situation? Should the situation be the way they are just because they have been like this for many, many years? So those are the questions he raised. And then he asked, it's a very fundamental question. He even, give an example of that on a situation. Are we ready to move away from from the West? Are we ready to move away from the West? And then, depending on how we answer that question, are we ready to pay the price of moving away? We have to be able to see how much it's going to cost us if we decide to move away. So some people will call it contradictions, but I think this is a global perspective of things, to look at things the way they interact, but they contradict, but the way you can also build something from it. So these basically are how I approach Mudimbe and how I want us to have a discussion on, should we move away? How can we move away? Are we ready to pay the price of moving away? And not forgetting that, I'm going here, I'm not talking about specifically from his essays, I'm talking about the pleasure of reading his fiction, where implicitly you find a discourse on the world. Because what he's writing about is not so just fiction, is about, I mean, it's just using the mean of fiction to talk about what really we should focus on, what we should be thinking about on a regular basis. So the consequence of a political discourse devoid of project. So we have to have a project. We have to know what we want. I think if there's one thing we have to remember about Mudimbe, is that this is someone who helped us think about ourselves and what we can do. And the best image he gave us, it was in one of his books called L'autre face du royaume. He says, we are in a building, right? You are in a building, we're going up and down. We know that we have to go on the third floor. That's where our solution is. But it keeps going up and down. And when we reach the third floor, we're not able to step out of the elevator. That step, that's the challenge I think Mudimbe asked us to think about. When are we going to take that step to move away from the elevator, so we can see maybe where we can find the solution to our problem? Raising the question and finding the solution probably is an individual task that all of us should think about. I think I'll stop here.
This is good.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Siamundele, for this fascinating talk on meeting. Dr. Makoni, over to you.
Thank you very much for this talk. I would like to enter into a conversation with you, but I want to start off with the discussion about names. Because I have a graduate student, I think she's here, who is also interested in names. In the Congo, after the announcement by Mobutu that people must change their names, what is the current state of play about naming practices in the Congo? Is there any body of scholarship that addresses the issues about the naming practices in the Congo?
I think Professor Ndaiwel has written about it, yeah, because even before the decision from the government, we have names. Our name, basically, they name the children based on the events surrounding the birth, but also as you know, sometimes we name children after someone else in the family. So it was pretty, I won't say easy, but it was kind of reminding us that we didn't need, and that's what I found out. We didn't really need those European names because we had our own names. We just didn't use them. And what is shocking is that in 1991, when Mobutu decided that he was no longer going to run or be the president, he was going to step down. The first reaction of people was to go back and get all those names. I was like, we're so used now, calling each other, all the kids born after 71, 73, they didn't have those names, but you find out that now they are 40s and 50s, they give you, I say, wait a minute, when you were growing up, you didn't call you that European name. Where did you get that from? So it's very interesting that we use, I mean, most of those names were Catholic names, when people get baptized, but they didn't really did that, and because we have our own names, we didn't just don't use them. And what Mobutu did is just to remind everybody: you go in the family, get your name, and think about when you were born, and the person you were named after, and take that name and remove the European name. Yeah.
And what is the current situation now? I know this is too broad a question.
Yeah.
In terms of naming in the Congo, I mean, are people more likely to use European names or African names or a combination of both?
I'll say it's really open. It's
It's
really
open.
open. Yeah. People use names based on I mean, parents sometimes they name their kids name based on a famous football player, for example, in Barcelona, or a famous first black president in the United States. They call their kids or Barack Obama.
Yes,
Uh,
yes.
but without even, thinking, why do we have that? And that's another question maybe we should be thinking about is this imperialist hegemony, They see these movies, they watch those TV, that they see more what's happening outside than what is happening in their own culture. And that's one of the reasons Sembene Usman decided that, he's gonna start making movies because it's much easier, even today. It's cheaper to watch a Hollywood movie in Kinshasa than to watch a film made by an African. So it's that imperialist hegemony where you find things coming from the West everywhere, and people get influenced by that. So I'll say that it's really open, and those who understand, uh, they go back to the African roots, but those who feel like, and they have an argument. So, they say, wait a minute, I love this football player. I want my kids to be called Messi or Ronaldo. Sometimes people don't think about those things the way we scholars think about it. And that's our problems too. Why do we don't make people understand that cultural alienation is still there? Fanon back in the 50s were denouncing them, and even today, still there. Why can't we go back? Why we consume what we don't produce, and we produce what we don't consume, right? That's the big question. And it looks like we don't really raise the question enough so people can understand and join us in our fights.
Now, my other question is
Yes.
partially unanswerable, but you are the ideal person to try and have a go at this. The body of scholarship that Mudimbe produced is very broad.
Yes.
From novels, fiction, to philosophical treatises, etc. Now, my question to you is, because you are likely to be one of the few people that have read both his theoretical, historical pieces and the fictional pieces. When you look at the Mudimbes in all these different types of texts that he produced, what do you think he was most comfortable writing in? As a novelist, fiction, poet, or when he was writing, let's say, The Invention of Africa, etc.? When you read all this body of text, because you are the one of the few people who have read all these different pieces together.
Okay, to answer that question, I'll go back and I'll tell you a story. I probably know it. He was diagnosed with a cancer, right? He had like 2 more years to live. And he said, before I die, I'd like to write novels, poetry, and essays. And after doing that, he went back to the doctor. They said, no, that was a misdiagnostic. You're fine. You're more years to live. So I love his fiction. The reason I love, I love his fiction. The reason I love it, as I said, you feel you enjoy the aesthetic because he has this Latin and Greek background, and you love the way he writes. But at the same time, you understand, like Ecart, for example, or Le Bellimonde. Bellimonde is just like, what the best way to put something that is, it's just like this text by La putain respectueuse. How can you say something good about something bad? How can you say that? This is a beautiful, bad thing, the belly mode. That's the contradiction. People, people always raise that question when they talk about Africa. There are all these contradictions. Oh, we are very rich, but wait a minute, I don't see that when I go to Africa. How can you say that you are rich? What is rich? Oh, we are very big, we have land, we have this, but it doesn't translate. So I really love his fiction. And I think after writing L'autre face du royaume, all the texts after that were just a different version of what really he believed in, which is that, the other way of looking at ourselves, the idea of Africa, the way to present ourselves. Let's not stick too much on Senghor or to Sheikh Anta Diop. Let's not just go back and talk about the Egyptian, like Césaire. Let's not talk too much about our relationship with the West. Let's l'autre face, another way of looking at ourselves. Yeah, I think that's a key text,
That's good.
yeah.
Okay, let me ask you the last question, then
Yes.
Have you ever taught a course in which you had Mudimbe as part of your seminal text? And if so, how did you teach that course?
I was in Switzerland as a graduate student, as an exchange graduate student, because doing my PhD here and being Francophone, Yale used to send a graduate students for 1 year in Paris, and so then they can work on their French. But in my case, they say it doesn't make sense to pay for you to go to France. We send you to Geneva, where you can teach as an assistant professor, as a teacher assistant. So you can teach the topic of your research. And I had a class called Ecart and Palilali. Before I start that class, because I knew my student didn't have a clue about Mudimbe. So I think it was one of his texts, I just took the text, a couple of paragraphs, like first day of classes, I handed to students. I said, okay, I think it was 20th century French and Francophone literature. I said, okay, give me some element in the text that tells you where the text is from, when it was written, and guess who wrote it. It was a very interesting exercise because some of them went back to Chateaubriand, to Victor Hugo, and then I showed them how universal the question of identity is. Because if if I've told you that this text was written by Mudimbe, born in the Congo, and writing about the Congolese situation, the question of identity of Africans, you will have focused all your attention to that. But just look at the text itself. So I approached Mudimbe by looking at the writer, the thinker, before I can focus on him being an African, because what he says is universal, but at the same time, I want people to know that Africa is part of this universe. So it's not just that, you read Shakespeare, you read Chateaubriand, and then you say, okay, I have the question of, to be or not to be. We're dealing with the same issue, to be or not to be, every day. So, and we think about it, we write about it, this is what we have. And, this is how I approach it. I don't know if I answer your question.
Yes, no, you have. Let me stop here. I still had a couple of more questions, but let me stop here because I know my other colleagues would like to come in. Thank you very much, my brother, for this. Thanks a lot. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Mokoni.
Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Mokoni. Dr. Siamundele, please can you close your screen? You're still sharing your screen.
Yeah, you want me to stop sharing?
Yes.
Andre, can you stop sharing your screen, please?
Okay.
Yeah.
So you see me better, yeah?
Yes.
Now we move on to the question and answer session. So if you have any question, please feel free to use the chat box or use the raise hand function.
Yeah. because I'm going to leave in 15 minutes for another forum.
Yeah.
I just like to follow up on a question that Makoni asked you about which particular facet of Mudimbe, which kinds of writings of Mudimbe did the author feel the most comfortable in? And I think that part of the answer to this question is to look at the history of his life. That in the Congo, professionally, he was in the Department of Romance Languages. And by the way, one of the reasons why Europeans like Mudimbe so much is that he spoke French like a Belgian or French person, but not like the regular African. But also there was a lot of erudition in the way that he spoke French. And that made him outstanding. In Francophone culture, the more erudite you sound, the more intelligent, smart you are supposed to be. That was really an easy right for it. But the other thing is that in the context in which he published in the Congo, then under the regime of Mobutu, because he didn't have a chance to practice his scholarship before the Mobutu regime, was the ambivalence that writing novels, in the form of fiction, gave them an opportunity to see the ambiguity that we can also find in his name. And you explained that very well. He is multifaceted, he is conflicted, but at the same time, the novels gave him a scapegoat to just to like resist accusation that he was writing against Mobutu's regime. That in reality, he was asking the right question that people should be asking about the political climate of the Congo, the cultural ambivalence of the Congo and the rest of Africa and so forth. And when he came to the United States, it was a kind of liberation where he could express his views more straightforwardly, not in the form of novels, but with the philosophical, sociological, anthropological orientation, and express the things that you could, about which you couldn't be so explicit when you wrote the novel. This is my take on it.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And there's even it says that when he wrote, and the best way to hide his opposition, even though he was very vocal compared to other scholar, in his poetry, Déchirure, he was really against the regime and wrote very hard words against that regime. And after that, he kind of brag about it. He said, I wrote it and I gave it to Mobutu. He has a copy in his office. He was very happy to read it. So, but when it also when you read his novels, you find what they call in literature, you find content, the space, the context. You can basically, like Chabadeux, he's using a very historical event, what really happened, but he's not approaching it in a political way. It's just looking at individual way, how people felt about it, how that's none felt about it. The same way during the revolution, all the revolutions we had, all the rebellions we had, he's using that instead of talking about the Mulele revolution, rebellion, or he instead he's using fiction. But when you read that, you basically go back to that space. You know what he's talking about. You know what really happened in history. So I totally agree with you. The liberation, and as we cannot forget that Mudimbe was a scholar, and as a scholar, sometimes you have to publish to make sure that those who are going to review your file understand what you're doing. And you write for them. That's what we do, you know. And when he came to the United States, he did it well. I mean, which, you know, writing idea of Africa and all the text thinking about that, and all his contribution with the invention of Africa. So to make sure that American scholars can understand what he's talking about. So
Right.
that's key. Yeah.
There's a term that Arthur Spears uses regarding ways of speaking in African American English, where an expression that can be interpreted one way in general American English is interpreted a different way
Yeah.
among speakers of African American English, and that term is camouflage. The author is here in the audience, he could well expand on that. But I think this is a term that would apply well to what we just discussed. That Mutimbe was very apt in camouflaging his subversion, so to speak, and his resistance in the novels that he published in his earlier professional life.
And then people say that it is very hard to understand, to read, to deconstruct, you know, because the way he used the language and the examples he gives, but then he tried to, and people said also, and I somehow I agree with that. His novel is a way also of making his philosophy accessible to a large audience, because when you see that, you connect that to characters, you can see points, you know, to you see, okay, but when you read The Invention of Africa, L'autre face du royaume, those texts, it may be difficult for you to understand because all the references, as you know, to the Greek, the Latin, and all his masters, which is, you know, you don't have time to go back to that, but when you read the story, you see how those affect characters in real historical situation. It makes more people understand.
Arthur?
Yes.
Did you call my name, right?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Oh.
Yeah, first of all, I want to say that I'm having a hard time hearing because I have only one hearing aid. So if I was to say something inappropriate, it's because I haven't heard something well that preceded.
Okay.
But, I want to say this as quickly as I can. I've always had a problem with people wrangling over identity. And what I have found in my life trajectory is that identity is a matter of culture. In other words, different peoples look at identity differently. And I grew up in a very rigidly segregated community during segregation in the United States. And we had our own view of identity. And it was assumed that people would have multiple identities and identities that they only wore, so to speak, during certain parts of their life. And one of the examples that I'll give you quickly is the Black community member in their work world and at church. And it was often commented that church was so wonderful for so many Black people, because even though you were a sanitation worker or a ditch digger in your work world, at your church, you could be a member of the board of trustees, highly respected, listened to, a leader looked up to. And of course, when you went to church, you dressed your best. And many people did not even know what your work was because you didn't, in many cases, discuss your work or even mention it unless you were someone prominent in the community. You didn't mention your work. I left the ghetto, and I use that term because that's what it was. I don't believe in prettifying situations, and went to the white world where I found new identity issues. And basically, as I got to know the white world, I found out that I had only one identity, and that was as a Black person. I had a predetermined biography. Whites were not interested in my background because they already knew it. They had a stereotypical biography for the Black person. So they already knew all of that. There was nothing to get to know. I left the white American world because I was interested in going to France for various reasons. And I got a third situation there, which was identity usually included the public and the private, not necessarily the private, depending on how well you knew the person. But the interesting thing is that I did not have a pre-assigned identity in France, which was 98%, 99% white then. So I was taken aback when I would be, say, at a dinner at colleagues' homes, and they would say, obviously, you're from such and such a background. And they would get it totally correctly. What socioeconomic class, what kind of parents I had, education, and so on and so forth. In other words, they could read me and they felt that there was something to read. In other words, they were dealing with me as an individual and not assigning to me a predetermined biography. So when there are these questions of identity, and it's very faddish and popular in certain sectors of sociolinguistics and anthropological linguistics, I can't relate to it. Identities, as I said, depend on the community you're in. As you traverse communities, they're going to be different identity structures, and you have to adapt to them if you're going to live in the community. So where's the problem? And one thing I'll say is in the African American community, there's no requirement that you bring your occupational identity to your identity in social context. In other words, you can know someone very well, they can be your best friend, and you don't know whether they're married, whether they have children, whether the woman you always see them with is their wife or their mistress or their daughter, you don't know. Because it is not a requirement that all aspects of you be taken to all of the social environments where you are. So I just want to problematize this discussion in the scholarly Western world about identity. Identity where? Are we taking into account how the people in this community, in that community, and the other community conceptualize identity? So thank you for your talk. You've given me something very, very important to think about in the future. because I had never really given voice to all of these concerns with these discussions of identity swirling around me in the academic world that I cannot relate to. So that's my piece.
Thank you for your contribution. And I think, I mean, you said it, you know, identity is a very complex concept. And what Mudimbe is doing is not to tell us what to do, it's just telling us that we are faced with situation where sometimes and most of the time we have to answer that question, who we are. Are we ready to give up something? Are we ready to pay the price to give up something? So that's how I'll put it. And when we start this talk, I was just telling Cecile that I grew up in Canada, and people, when they look at me, they can't even think that I spend my time watching hockey. That's my sport. I played that sport when I was young. You know, here I am. And she told me that you were born in the Congo. Yes, I was born in the Congo. But that's part of my identity. I know all the players there. But if you ask me to name some basketball player, maybe I can't. So, which kind of odd because people would expect me to be in such category. And I always ask that question the first day of classes, and to my student, I say, okay, in the class on identity, I say, okay, how do you define yourself? Give me one word. I have different words. For some people, is that I'm a student, I'm a woman, I'm gay, I'm this. That's the first thing, but that's not the first thing people see. That's not the first, that is not what the government is interested in. The government wants to know your name, where you were born, where you live, and that's but for you, living in Philadelphia is not that important. What is important for you is being a man. So when I just something we talk about the first day of class is just about, you know, how complex that identity is. But what Mudimbe is doing is I mean, specifically for Africans, you know, because that question have been raised before him, and he's just adding his voice by saying that, you know, you're looking at the mirror, you can fix the mirror, but why can't you fix it? You can't. Why aren't we fixing it so we can see ourselves? Because we don't have one identity, and I agree with you on that. There's no one identity. Even when people we're talking about, I've been using the word here, Africa, but from Egypt to South Africa, I mean, what type of difference you can find? You know, well, even when we use those terms, why are we using those terms? Should we be using different terms? Is there a solution to it? Maybe there's not. Who has to find a solution on that one? I don't know. Did they find a solution in Europe? Did they find a solution in Asia? Were they able to say what America means? Who's an American? No. But you define yourself who you are. And if you to be able to raise the question, to be able to see all the possibility, to know about it. So I think that's the key. I think that's the credit I'll give Mudimbe for doing that. And I agree with you. It's a very, very complex issue. Yeah. You know, depending on where you are, depends on, you know, what you're doing, and you can have three identities. I wake up in the morning, at the end of the day, I find myself speaking three different languages in one day. How many people do that? Many people do that. I have friends who speak 7 languages in one day. You know, you teach in English, you teach in French, you come home, you speak Lingala, they call you in Kinshasa and you speak Kikongo. 4 languages in one day. How do you explain that to someone who was born in a small town in Maine, who has never been in a city, never been to Boston, who watch all the shows made by Americans? How do you explain to that person that French people have great filmmakers, or Africans can make movies Iranians can make cars. How can you do that? There's no way. Unless they read Mudimbe and they realize that, yes, I should be asking myself these questions. Am I ready to give up something? And what it costs to give up this thing? Who I am?
Thank you, Dr. Arta, for your contribution. But before that, like, we have a lot of comments buried in the comment chat box. Mama Ni also says he was a polymath. Mama Ni, thank you for your contribution. Madimbe was concerned with the crisis of the African self, African epistemology and self-determination, like the colonial library, a crisis of authenticity. Thank you for sharing Ecart with us. It's giving me some food of thought about why he was concerned with looking at the African from the outside in and the inside out. Because even with Lodo Duper, the saint of the father, he was exploring similar ideas. Thank you, Mama Ni, for your contribution. And Vanessa also contributes. You said we consume what we do and not produce. As the world moves deeper into videos, oil being further brainwashed by these northern epistemologies, is it constantly absorbed no matter how we try to avoid it? This is Vanessa's contribution.
Okay.
And Patience also has a comment. Thank you, Dr. Andre, for the wonderful presentation. And thank you, Prof. Marconi, for asking the question on naming in Congo on my behalf. She found it very interesting to learn about Mobutu's advocacy for adapting indigenous Congolese names, a move similar to what Kwame Nkrumah championed in Ghana after independence. So she believes that this issue of identity and self-recognition is a broader challenge across Africa. And in her recent reading, she learned that in Kenya, children are sometimes named after brave feats, and it's not unusual to come across names like Trump Uteno. This makes her wonder, is the adoption of European names purely a product of globalization, or is there something deeper at play? What is your take on this, Dr. Siamundele?
Okay. Yeah, I think the name, I mean, there's one thing we can, we can legislate on name, you know, there can be a legislation on name, depends on countries. But I think whatever we do, names are left to the parents to make that decision. I was in Ghana once. I was in a big hotel because my concept of Ghanaian is that they don't have Christian names. Okay, I mean most Ghanaian I've known in my life, and I was in Accra in a hotel, and the workers, I mean all the people in that working at that hotel, they had names like William, John, Paul. I called one of them. I said, "Wait a minute, this doesn't sound like what I'm expecting from Ghana." They told me, they said, "No, they asked us to have Western name for the tourists, to make it easy for the tourists to call us." I said, "Really?" So I was just thinking about, you know, maybe it's just me, you know, the other way around, coming to New York City and going to a big hotel and finding people with African names. That would be interesting. You know, why don't you ask people just to respect who you are, and if you respect who you are, you believe in who you are, your name, you go back and you say that, you know, I mean, when I say my name, for example, people look at it. I remember that, you know, somebody looking at me and say, your name must mean something. Yes, it does. It does. But when I ask them, well, your name is George Bush, it must mean something. You say it doesn't. I say it does. Bush, I mean, you know, you open the dictionary, it means something. You know, your name is Baker, it means something. You know, and we are I mean, most African ethnic groups, they have names with a meaning. And I think that's great. And Mobutu, what Mobutu did was just to remind Africans, that you have something to be proud of. You have something to be proud of because we went through this brainwash process during colonization, which is hard to get rid of even today. And I mean, you can read Edouard Said, Fanon, all of these. They talked about it. But Ubuntu came up with that legislation saying that, okay, let's change the name. And the people were against that. Who really voiced it. I mean, is the Catholic Church. How can you ask someone who has been called Joseph all his life to be called Tunde? Because Joseph means something for the Catholic Church. And then Mobutu will say, before being Catholic, this person is first Congolese. Okay, here we go, another discussion, right? What do? Are you first Catholic or are you first Congolese? So it's up, that's what I said, it's up to the parents to decide which one comes first, right? If you think that your child should be called Joseph, I mean, they should be called, and what people didn't like is that the government will make a legislation about that. But let's leave it up to the parents. That's what happened in 1991, and they went back to those names. And even myself, I went back to my André. I wasn't called André for about 20 years of my life. And then when I came to the US, again, I brought my André back because before that, I had some documents with André. Yeah. And then I have my other name, Nzunguta, which attached to Siamundele. So, and I think it's something to think about it, okay? And I think for what I think is important for us here to not just accept what we see, what we have been given to, but to start thinking about, does it have to be like that? And also to think about our sources. That's what Mudimbe has done also, where we get information from. Even though you can go back to him, say you exactly did the same thing before. The way you write is the way you masters. I mean, when I say master, I mean teachers, and I've taught you. It's very hard. There's this book called L'odeur du père. This is a notion that you find in many fields, even in linguistics. I remember when the first time we had this class on linguistics, they say, okay, it's the linguistic sign change, but it's still the same. Okay. But how can you be different than your master? Can you move away? Did we go back and I think somebody was about it and talking about the Oedipus complex. It's with you. There's no way you can give it up. And Jean-Paul Sartre even said that when when Senghor, Césaire, with the Decoloniality movement, they were criticizing the French people or the French language. He said that you can criticize us, but you'll be doing it in French because you cannot do it in African language. It's true. Césaire and Senghor could not speak another language. When they talk to each other, they use French. And then he added, we can leave Africa, but we'll still be there. Because in order for someone from Côte d'Ivoire and someone from the Congo to communicate, they will need us. And that's what's happening. Think about how many languages we have. But in order for me to communicate with someone from Cameroon, I have to go back and use that tool that was given, not given, imposed to be the French language. That's the only way. You go to most African countries, the first thing in their constitution, the official language is French. And I don't know if you're familiar with Chamoiseau. Chamoiseau wrote about it. He laughed about it. He said, I don't understand Africans. Even then, they have tons of languages, and those languages don't even reach the parliament. You go to the parliament in Abidjan, in Dakar, in Yaoundé. The elected officials are discussing national issues in French. Why? Because probably they haven't sit down and think that they can do it in another language than French. And then you have the case of Rwanda, where they say, okay, we don't want the French anymore. We're going to take English. But that's the only country probably they have just one language, one, Kenya-Rwanda. And then now progressively they are developing that language, using that language. So it's a global issue. And I started my talk today by saying that there's no better place than the global forum to talk about Mudimbe, because here we have to start. I mean, you think about, you look at things globally. Okay, it's not just one side, but you look how things are connected to other things. What Mudimbe is saying, when you look at the context, you know that where he's coming from and where he end up, at the end of his life. So you can look at all of that globally. You cannot just pick one side, one part of his life. It's all connected.
Thank you. Vanessa?
Yes, thank you. I kept thinking about when you name a thing, you own a thing. And at this time in the world, with this global commodification, we're the most likely victims. I'm going to use that for want of a better word, because we wear costumes of color. So we think, okay, we're immediately identified and classified based on what we look like. And then when you said we consume what we do not produce, so we're consuming the language of the colonizers. And so if we're naming things like, naming our kids messy, we never truly become messy. We can't own this thing. So we're trapped forever in this existential gap. So to me, it seems like it's just always going to be increasing. Or would you say that there's, we're obviously, all of us here are trying to find a way out of that, but it's so insidious. We're immersed in it. I don't know. I just find it overwhelming in many cases. That's it. Thank you very much. Very stimulating talk.
I agree with you, but when I talk about we consume what we don't produce and we produce what we don't consume, I was looking at it globally. Okay, you go to Africa, for example, just give you an example. The first time I went to Senegal, I wanted to taste the wine, the palm wine. Okay, I was in my hotel, I said, can I have palm wine? They look at me and laugh at me. People don't drink that here. You want some Jack Daniels? I said, no, I don't drink those things. If I want to drink Jack Daniels will be in New York or in Paris. I mean, here in Africa. So we produce things we don't consume. That's in that sense. And we have stuff that we have to send to other people to produce, and then we buy them. Very expensive. So that's what I meant, we produce, I mean, during colonization, we spend more time, people die, people work hard to get, how do you call that, caoutchouc, what's the term for caoutchouc? When they were cutting hands of,
Gum. Gum.
Caoutchouc for the car, to build the car.
The gum tree.
No, you know what the beginning of industrial revolution, the beginning of the 20th century, Leopold II had the Congolese work hard to produce
rubber.
Yeah, rubber. Okay, but those rubbers was not for the Congolese. It was shipped here. We were producing them there for here. So in that sense, and it's true also for the languages, right? I mean, look at our education system, what we read, how we teach our kids back in Africa. Okay. Does it always have to be like that? That's an open question. What I like about Mudimbe is that he's raising the question. So it's up to each of us. You know, if somebody thinks that they have a very solid arguments to call a little kid born somewhere in a village in Côte d'Ivoire, Messi or Ronaldo or Obama, that's up to them. But you know, but I'd be happy, me myself personally, I'm happy to land in Nigeria and to know that someone's name is Yetunde or Obafami, or you know, yeah, really.
Yetunde is very happy.
Oh yeah.
Thank you, Doc.
Yeah.
Please, Halal also contributes. She
Yeah.
says she found it very valuable to connect his ideas with the question of identity, particularly in the African context. So in the part where you mentioned decolonizing the mind, how do you see this idea being practically applied today in African academic or cultural context, considering the challenges regarding publishing and global reach?
Yeah, but I think, I mean, Gungiwa had a wonderful idea about, you know, decolonizing the mind, but it's more about decolonizing the language too. Because when you read, I mean, when you read the story of most writers, you know, like Chinua Achebe, for example, you know, you bring that text, that's your first text as a young writer, to a British publisher. He looked at it, they said, well, this is not English, you know. The same thing with the French. But I argued that, you know, even though we have to decolonize the mind, but we also have to decolonize the language. The language should be able to say what my culture wants me to say. I'm not going to, and I always tell students, you know, when I say, okay, you don't want to go to France, it's too far, go to Quebec, go to Montreal for a semester. Say, no, but they don't really speak French there. That's not fully French. I say, why you want someone who grew up in Montreal to speak French like someone who grew up in Paris? Do you expect that from someone from London and someone from Houston to speak the same English? No. The language has to adapt to, of course, we have the standard one. You have to make sure you spell well. But now I don't know if spelling means anything to this new generation, but you have to spell it right. You have to know what a verb is, what, you know, what an object is. That's fine. But if you, my internet is unstable. Yeah. So what I'm saying is that you have to be able to, the language has to adapt, you know. You can decolonize your mind, but you have to make sure that your tool of communication is also decolonized. And we see that with Osman Samben, you know, the Senegalese filmmaker, where the topic of his movie, people can find themselves, you know, recognize themselves because they see characters with their names. One of my friends said, you know, his name is Samba. He said, the first time he opened the book and said, you see a character with his name. Because he used to have to read all these French novels with characters with different names. But can you imagine, you read a book, there's a character called Samba Diallo, L'aventure ambiguë. You say, wow, and you love it. And it helps in terms of empowering your identity.
Thank you.
I don't know if I made clear that that expression of we consume what we don't produce, we produce what we don't consume. About it, it's true. Yeah.
Thank you. Mama Ni also contributes that why did Modimbi not explore matters around the African American community, being so concerned with this existential crisis of the conflation of the European with the African, and the colonial and how to decolonize, which was a living reality of African American too?
Yeah,
Yes.
that's true, because that has been done also by African Americans. I can think of many of them, even teaching here at Lincoln, they are former students, who wrote about their own identity as African American. But maybe I can answer for Mudimbe. Maybe he didn't have time to think about, maybe he wanted to focus more on Africa. But the question he raised is also a question of, I mean, African American can also find themselves and understand it. I connect to that question. We saw what's happened between in the 30s, when Césaire and Senghor were questioning their identity because they grew up thinking that they were French. And when they met in Paris, they realized that they were Black, because people were looking at them and say, look at that Black person. But they never thought about that. And at the same time, in the United States, we have the Harlem Renaissance. They're having the same issue, questioning their race, saying that the color of their skin, because they had the same type of discrimination. So an African American who reads Mudimbe can find similarity with the type of crisis or questions we have in the African American community. But specifically, it's true he didn't focus on that. But I think those questions are real. Yeah.
Okay. Alfred also has a comment in the chat box. He says, Nkrumah talks about the African personality. Do you find this concept in dialogue with Mudimbe's ideas?
African personality, according to Nkrumah, it's a way of supporting the Pan-Africanism. Let's think Africa first before we can think about our differences. For example, if I'm from Côte d'Ivoire, I should trade with Burkina Faso or Mali before I can trade with Europeans. That's how you build the African personality. But that wasn't very successful. It wasn't very successful. And then I want to say it here. It wasn't very successful because we did not get rid of the divisions. That's where planted between those communities. So how do you build the African personality if you don't remove those differences in the first place? So that's why I think Pan-Africanism is still a work in progress. I'm not going to say that is a failure. It's still a work in progress, because we can see that was the idea of Lumumba, Kwame Nkrumah, but also Sékou Touré. But it wasn't very successful. We know that those three were punished different ways, so they couldn't carry out their mission. But after that, if you look at the politics of Africa, you can see some reincarnation of that, those ideas. Are they going to carry on? Are they going to be successful this time? I don't know. Maybe it's going to take time. Europeans took a long time before they were able to say that, we don't think there will be a war between France and Germany soon. So I think that the process would have been, to remove first the division, but we didn't do that. We still refer to, and we find that in the first page of Gonge, we all continue to refer to African countries as Anglophone countries, Francophone countries, Lusophone countries. Why? Because that's how we think about Africa. That's what we think. The map of Africa we have in our mind, in our head, is the map that was designed by all the people based on their own interests. And we so interrealized that we cannot think about Africa differently. We think about Burkina Faso and Cote d'Ivoire as two different countries. But at the same time, there's the same community. Look at the Congo, for example, right? We say Angola, Congo, Brazzaville, Congo, Kinshasa. Can we change that and start thinking about Africa and removing those borders? And then we create other borders, right? Do you want to do that? And then they tell you, no, that's the reason we have all these wars. The first article of the African Union is that we do not change borders. That's the first thing this. Okay. How can you say that the first thing of your identity is what people have said about you? That's something you didn't decide. True. Your name, is that the first thing of your identity? You did not choose your name. Your parents did that for you. That's the first thing you should not change. Before you change that, you have to go to the court, and it's a long process. So I think that's the same thing with the borders. So to just the long answer to your question, no, the African personality is a good idea, but it was an expression of a Pan-Africanism. Pan-Africanism did not really work because we all continue to think in terms of European imposed borders.
Sawa?
Thank you very much for giving me a chance to speak. I am not part of the webinar, actually, but I've been invited like a guest to your webinar. Unfortunately, I came a little bit late. I am originally from Sudan.
Okay.
Okay. We produce everything.
Yeah.
And we send what we produce to the world. And then we buy it again with foreign countries' stamps. And we have this government always continue to do the same. And we have every sort of resources you can imagine: metals, water, plants, forest, gums, everything. But we just sell it as raw material. And whenever we have a new finance minister, the first thing he think of is to go out and borrow some money from somewhere.
Yeah.
Instead of closing the country and trying to do something, you know, of course, that we are having a war at the moment. We are hoping that we are not going to go back to the same rhythm that we used to have. I'm telling you, thank God, you are not being colonized by two cultures. You are being colonized by two cultures: Arab Muslim and English Christian, which is some part of the Sudan. They are exposed to the English Christian culture, and then they are being forced by the independent declaration that this Sudan is an Arab Muslim country. Okay? So everybody has to study Arabic and Islam, whether they are having the background of English Christian or not. If they have any idea of following this religion or not. But we are trapped in these two cultures. We got our own civilization. It's a Nilotic civilization. It's very old civilization. It's a Cushian and Nubian culture. But we have no connection with our ancestor language. And of course, we don't have any connection with the culture and the identity, our identity. We are having an identity crisis in the country. The whole country have an identity crisis, whether they are Southerner or Northern or Eastern or Western. Although we have at the moment many local languages which is being approved by the UNESCO as one of the oldest languages in Sudan. Okay, like the Eastern Sudan, They speak Badawic language. West Sudan, they have the 4 language. In the Southern Sudan, the Equatorian and the Nilotic. But we cannot have any language policy that fit this huge amount of people, 40 million. They having an identity crisis. And these people are confused. They're going around themselves. And it's not something that is easy. If you look at the psychiatric book, you will find that the identity crisis is one of the disease where the person lose his identity and come repeat himself, and is like a sort of disability, you know, where you cannot get out of it. And the problem that we at least, you know, slow a little bit the English Christian approach, although we have one of the oldest church in Sudan, in north of Sudan, but the Arab and Muslims are dominating us. We don't have one single person in Sudan who is Arabic. They call themselves Arabs. As they said that they are belongs to Prophet Muhammad. Okay? They don't belong to Prophet Muhammad. They might be belongs to Bilal, the man who used to ask people to come to prayers. He's a black man. I don't know. They brought him from Ethiopia or somewhere from Africa. All this heavy heritage of confusion, of identity losses, we are trying to go back to the Meroitic and Ramkamatiya language, which is some of it signs and Meroitic from Meroe, the kingdom of Meroe, but that is impossible at the moment, because even the people who study language, I'm not a linguist, I'm a town planner, the most boring job on planet. Anyway, thank you very much for giving me this chance, and I don't think it is easy to decolonize all the policies and the stuff that we are still working with. And I don't know how to go out of this mess. Not only me, most of the people who is revolutionary, people who is interested in making a new Sudan with John Garang manifesto. Okay, who left it. He's part of the Pan-African movement in the past. He's from the southern of Sudan, but unfortunately he's being killed by part of the Muslim brothers and American. We don't know who killed him anyway. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. It makes me, I just want to share this with you. There's a movie called Colonial Misunderstanding. I don't know if you have seen that movie. Colonial Misunderstanding.
No, I didn't, but I will watch it for sure.
Yeah, because I think, I mean, some people present that as, you know, when the colonizers came, the African thought that they were welcoming friends. And then they realized that no, those were not your friends. They were people who are coming to make you work for them. So in Colonial Misunderstanding, there's a quote that I really loved. You can even find it on YouTube. Say, we can forgive Europeans for taking our resources. We can forgive them for taking our land. But it's impossible to forgive them for taking our mind. And people always think that the solution to those poor countries is more money, helping them. No. As you said, the mind. How do you cure those minds? That's the most difficult one, because if they give you, what's happened to those governments? When they give them money, they take the same money, They send it back to Paris, to Belgium, to United States to buy goods there, and the money stays here. Where it came from, when it goes back where it came from. That's how it works. Economists will tell you that, you know, Africa needs more help, more aid. That's not true. It's the mind that you have to change. How are you gonna do that? That's the question. Who's working on doing that? Let's write in African language. Let's teach Africans how to cure their minds, to love themselves, to stop thinking the solution is always out there. Sometimes the solution is where we are. Let's consume what we produce. Let's produce what we need and consume it there. We able to do that? And if we get to the same Ecart situation, existential gap, where you think that you're finding a solution, but you cannot find a solution inside that box. You have to be out of that box. But you can't be outside the box. You cannot think outside the box. We don't. We build our universities, we build our political system based on what they have done. Our judicial system, we take the Napoleon Code, we copy it, and we say, okay, this is our political system, this is judicial system. That's what we do. But how to think outside of that box? I remember I went to a conference once to Brazil, was in Brasilia. And the keynote speaker, Professor Barry, was coming from Senegal. He said, I'm going to Brazil. I don't want to go through Paris. I don't want to go through Europe. I want an airline that will take me from Dakar to Rio de Janeiro. It's very challenging, right? Because we only had, they offer him the airlines, the travel agency, you know, you can take Air France, spend 2 hours in Paris, connect. And he said, no, I want to go straight from Dakar to Rio de Janeiro. He couldn't find one. We don't have an airline that can connect us to Brazil. Then he took Turkish Airlines. But yes, you have to go to Istanbul. Feel a little bit better than go to Paris, right? But it's still Turkish. And when you think about Turkey, 50 years ago, and they tell you that, wait a minute, Turkey was the same level than Ghana 50 years ago. What's happened? How come Turkish is there, one of the biggest airports in Europe, if we want to call it Europe? But Ghana is still struggling. How come South Korea was at the same level than Ghana 50 years ago, but South Korea is making nice cars. I've seen some of them now. They used to be bad, but now you look at Kia, wow, what is this? You look at the unit, we say, wow, these people, what about us? So it's the mind. Maybe we have to work on our mind, not forget about resources, you know, because they're going to take that anyway. Resources, our land, they're going to take, but change our minds. What we teach our kids. It's hard.
Yes, very hard, very hard.
Yeah.
The education system is like the British and Arab system, and we are going in a vicious circle. I don't know how we're going to break this vicious circle.
Yeah. I don't know if you know the situation of a country called Gambia. Gambia is inside Senegal.
Of course, yes.
They get to a point sometimes they don't talk to each other. Gambia prefer to trade with Ghana because they speak the same English language. But if you go to Gambia, you cross the border, you go to Senegal, they eat the same food. They're all Muslim. And they are the same people. They speak Wolof. You say, wait a minute, what's the problem with you? You are brothers. Oh no, they speak French, we speak English. Why the British and the French don't have that problem? And the situation is even worse. Because if you are in France, you drive on the left side of the road, you go on the other way, if they speak a different language, and you drive on the right side of the road. But they trade. It doesn't seem to be a problem. But the Gambian and the French, the Senegalese, oh, they fight over, they are French, we are English. I mean, they are Francophone, we are Francophone. Why? But all of them are Wolof people.
Thank you, Dr. Siamundele. As we wrap up to the after party, we have a lot of comments in the chat box. Dr. Arthur, Patience agrees with your submission that identity depends on the community we find ourselves in, and our communities have set a standard we are obliged to follow despite what. And she believes this whole issue about reorienting. So, thank you, Patience. Thank you, Arthur. Halad also says thank you for the insightful answer. She really appreciates the link you made between decolonizing the mind and the language is showing how language can adapt to reflect cultural identity and empower communities, and how this can contribute to reclaiming our own narratives. Thank you, Halal. Arthur?
In listening to all of these really profound and wonderful comments, there seems to be a theme, particularly during the latter part of our discussion today, and it focuses on decolonizing the mind. And I started thinking, why don't we have more writing among us about specific projects of decolonizing? I find everything is at a level that's conceptual, intellectual, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, but there is so little that touches the ground and describes possible projects or correcting the language situation, say in Africa. It's not the only place in the world, but we're focusing on Africa. We have lots of information in the different disciplines and subdisciplines,